Hello everyone, how y'all doing? So I'm gonna share my own thoughts on a recent controversy that occurred with AMD, of course, obviously. Now, I'm just gonna tell you right now that my perspective on this whole situation. This is mainly for people that already know what the fuck's going on, but my perspective on this is gonna be a little bit more. I wouldn't say nuanced, but maybe a little bit more detached for reasons that I'll explain later in the video. But essentially, what ended up starting the whole controversy because I saw a bunch of content creators talk about this, including Hardware Unbox. I think today I saw Gamers Nexus upload a video on AMD's response, and I'll share more details on that. But essentially, the entire controversy initiated because of this update. So basically, it was stating here that RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 graphics card will continue to receive driver updates for critical security fixes and bug corrections, obviously. To focus on optimizing and delivering new and improved technologies for the latest GPUs, AMD Software Adrenaline Edition 25.10.2 places Radeon RX 5000 and RX 6000 series of graphics card, RDNA 1, RDNA 2, into maintenance mode. Now, when you read this statement, people, understandably, saw to focus on optimizing and delivering new and improved technologies for their latest GPUs, latest as in, well, at least above RDNA 1 and 2, then people will read this and think, oh, so that means that you're not going to focus any longer on bringing optimizations for these old series of cards. People were a little bit concerned because this is something that happens a lot with on PCs, that typically video games will come out and not to say that the game's not gonna work if there isn't any any driver update, but it is one of those things where it's you probably will need to install the latest adrenaline, um well, in this case, let's just simplify the latest driver that will have game ready. They tend to label it as game ready driver for certain games that will basically iron out any particular bugs or additional optimization left to do. May be able to gain a little bit more performance by installing the drivers. Because I remember, for example, I think it was there were a couple of games that came out this year that there was even this one game that was Nvidia sponsored, I think, or at the very least, Nvidia had something to do with promoting, whether it's through the RTX on campaigns that they always do with they always promote the ray tracing and DLSS 4 and stuff like that. But I think I remember there was this one game where Nvidia hadn't yet released game ready drivers for it, so it is definitely an important thing. While I am someone who's usually on the opinion that hey, you don't necessarily have to install the most bleeding edge drivers, but in the case of video games, you might end up needing it, because if you don't, there's definitely some performance that will be left on the table if you don't do that. And so people were very understandably concerned about this because listen, at the end of the day, like RDNA 1, this series of graphics card came out in what year? 20, it was either 2018 or 2019. I don't entirely remember which year it was, but RDNA 2, sure, it came out in 2020, but there were still graphics cards for this generation that were coming out in 2022. I think there was even the 70, no, the 6750. There may have also been some GRE models that came out years after that. So it's not like this generation of graphics card just became dormant. They were still releasing graphics card and people were buying throughout the years. And so to announce that they weren't going to essentially focus on optimizing graphics cards for the generation is definitely, it's a bad look. It's a very fucking bad look. Now I heard about this, and honestly, when I first heard about it, I didn't really I didn't really think much of that. Again, I'll explain later why. But eventually AMD clarified that no guys, you were confused. You were confused essentially. I remember they actually wrote a statement. Let me see if I can find them the article that they wrote about this. It's either an AMD Radeon or I want to see the actual article because the article is kind of funny, not gonna lie, and I cannot find it. It was like a Twitter article. I didn't even know Twitter articles were a thing. Dude, I can't find it. Fuck. AMD main maintenance mode. I saw the article. I saw it somewhere. Fuck. Ah man, but it was like a funny article. Not gonna lie. It's like there seems to be some confusion. It's like not really confusion. We were just reading. We were just reading the statement that you laid out to us as it is. But whatever. I don't really want to harp too much on this because like essentially AMD clarified that like don't worry, we are still going to bring game optimizations for this generation of cards. We're not like completely abandoning it like the like basically what people were interpreting from that statement. Like they're essentially saying no, we're not going to do that. Like I think there was also a statement that stated that like yeah, it was gonna be based on market needs. But again, they did release an article after this that like clarifies that like no, like we are actually like we are legitimately like still supporting this. Like notably, it's not just a case of oh, GTA 6 comes out, we'll release a driver like a game ready driver, and then after that we're basically becoming dormant. Like it does seem like they are legitimately like want to like continue developing this, but it's what it seems to be. And to be honest with you, that's what I initially thought they actually meant, which was more so that following this, they weren't really going to like bringing to like they weren't really gonna bring any like additional features for this specific generation, these two generations of graphics cards. Like I think generations prior to that, I think they might have actually just straight up abandoned support for that, or at least it has less support than this. But like in this case in specific, like it's more of a case like they're not really gonna focus on bringing new features, and to that I do definitely understand why, because AMD recently they've been going a little bit hammy with AI, and the fact of the matter is, it was only until Ardenate 3 where they introduced AI acceleration, and so following this, I don't really see them focusing on new features for those older gens. And because at the end of the day, it's not just a case of oh, AMD's like drunk with AI, the AI bubble and stuff like that, which they are, but it's also a case of like the operating system that they're designing these graphics cards for are also demanding AI. Like Microsoft is, really pushing the fucking Copilot shit, and like AMD's literally releasing laptops and CPUs that like have the AI brand or like supposed to utilize the NPU on those laptops, and that's supposed to be well integrated with the operating system. And so AI is becoming more and more like embedded into the the technology development present in AMD. And so because of the fact that RDNA 2 and prior don't have any AI accelerators, meanwhile Nvidia has had like AI cores for a long time, which is one of the reasons why they've been ahead on AMD when it comes to other things, not even just in gaming, but also some of the productivity oriented stuff. And so it does, at least to me, it seems like AMD's intention is to both catch up to how far behind they are when it comes to this, but also they're all just adapting to the newer environment that they've kind of they're in right now, essentially. So that's how I interpret it. And look, if that's what they're doing, I don't necessarily disagree. It's like, yeah, maybe at this point, like, like I'm thinking, for example, do I expect them to release like newer versions of FSR that work on RDNA 2? I'm a little less confident with that. Newer versions of like, AFMF. I don't like AFMF, but do I expect them to bringing some of the things that they've been promoting with their newer generations? Do I expect them to introduce like their chat bot stuff like that to these older generation of cards? I don't think so. Not because I think it's impossible, but it's more of a case of these cards, they were essentially they were not ahead of time. That's what I would say. They were not ahead of time. Honestly, I think that maybe AMD, looking back, if they could introduce AI accelerators to these graphics cards, they probably would, because, well, to be fair, maybe they wouldn't, because I guess that is also an excuse for them to sell their newer generation of consoles. I keep saying generation of consoles, their newer generation of GPUs. So maybe they're not actually that remorseful, but it is a case of there's not really a lot of reasons to bringing new features, because technically speaking, they were still kind of doing that with at least with the 6000 series. I remember it was like sometime in 2022, 2023, there was like this huge like ray tracing boost that occurred after like a patch and stuff like that. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm imagining we're going to see less with these generations. Like we're not really going to see like um huge improvements, newer features that, you know, kind of change the way you use your cars, like bringing new life to them. Like that's what that's what at least I assume is not gonna happen. And if that's the case, you know, not the most ideal scenario, but like at the end of the day, I don't see that as like I kind of expect that to happen is what I would say. However, the perspective that I want to, and also I just also want to make it clear that like this isn't necessarily me like endorsing this move. It's more of a case of I can see their perspective. Like at the end of the day, I obviously want FSR 4 on RDNA 2. I have an RDNA 2 card. I have the 6900 XT. Of course, I want official FSR 4 support. Not that I fucking need it, because I found out how to get FSR 4 to work on my card. But still, like little things like that, I obviously would benefit a lot from that. But like, you know, I also have to look at things logistically. But regardless, what I also wanted to talk about a little bit is the backtrack, because a lot of people saw this statement, and understandably they sort of interpret this as AMD sort of walking back and using the whole confused excuse. And look, like I said before, I think that that statement was funny. However, I will say that like even though it would certainly be the sensational decision, the more spicy take to have in this regard, I will say that I don't disbelieve this statement. I actually am more inclined to believe that they always intended to. Oh wait, actually, hang on. New feature, bug fixes, and game optimization will continue to be delivered as required by market needs. Oh, I guess they are gonna bring new features. Maybe this part they might have walked back, but bug fixes, they always did it was gonna be bug fixes. But game optimizations, this part right here, I always assumed that would be the case, because the thing is, I know people like, because the first thing that people thought about when they heard this news was essentially, you know, AMD was fucking over the consumers. Like people were buying their GPUs only to find out that they would essentially have their support completely abandoned. And I think I even remember I saw a video with the title, "I'm never trusting AMD after this." I understand why. With that said, and you know, I know people interpret this as them walking back, but like I actually think this was always going to be the plan. And admittedly, when I first heard about this, I didn't really know what maintenance mode was, and to this day, I still don't fully understand what that actually means. But one thing I can say is that I never expected AMD to just outright abandon support for at least RDNA 2. RDNA 1, I might be a little bit more convinced, but RDNA 2, I never believed that they were going to abandon support for it, because to me, at the end of the day, you know, I look at AMD, I think a little bit differently from other people, because uh essentially people essentially just kind of look at AMD Radeon, the Radeon division, as like a competitor to Nvidia, which it is. But to me, I see Radeon from a much more realistic position, which is more of a case of it's a graphic division that exists so that they can essentially pitch to other companies that want to commission their APUs, whether it's for laptops, gaming handhelds, gaming consoles. Like that is essentially why this exists. Like at the end of the day, you know, I don't think AMD is necessarily growing their business through selling their GPUs to consumers alone. Like, really, Radeon exists so that they can pitch to the higher companies that would have good enough. And I'm getting a notification for Uber Eats. That's pretty funny. I hope this doesn't fucking show any like my address while recording this video. But yeah, like at the end of the day, I don't think like AMD, like their intention is always going to be to like look viable to companies that want to commission their hardware. And at the end of the day, RDNA 2, while it is being less pushed into some of the laptops and APUs that we're seeing. But like at the end of the day, we are still seeing RDNA 2 on some pieces of hardware. First of all, current consoles, they rely on RDNA 2. Like the PS5 and the Xbox Series S and X, they have RDNA 2 graphics there. And so just for that alone, I feel like AMD has incentive to continue optimizing their drivers to run modern games. But then there's also the fact that just recently Asus released it was I don't know if it's like I don't know if it's been a month or like a couple of weeks, but like Asus released like their Xbox handhelds, and I believe the cheaper edition has like the same APU as the Steam Deck, or at least a similar one, and that one has RDNA 2. If I'm not mistaken, there are still plenty of laptops that have RDNA 2. There's still the fact that like Asus recently released like the Xbox handheld, and that was like highly promoted. Like I'm pretty sure that was even promoted by AMD. Like at the end of the day, like even if you believe that AMD would be willing to piss off consumers for their greed, I personally think it's less likely for them to want to piss off the OEMs that commission their hardware, because I would have to imagine that like companies like Asus that are still commissioning some of their APUs that have RDNA 2 graphics, only for them to find out that, and it's not just Asus, I think even Lenovo, I think the Legion Go, one of the Legion Go actually has RDNA 2. There might even be some Neo handhelds. Like I would have to imagine that it's not in AMD's best intent to essentially like break any type of trust from these companies who still commission their APUs that have RDNA 2 in it, only for them to realize like like in the case of Asus, like weeks or a month later, that the GPU architecture there is not going to be supported anymore. Like like yeah, that's a really bad look. Like I don't personally believe, like maybe you might believe, like maybe you might find it convincing, maybe you think that AMD is that greedy, but I personally, I don't find that to be likely. I don't find it to be a very likely scenario. I think that they were always going to bring game optimizations and bug fixes. Like this one is like obvious. Like they literally stated here like critical security fixes and bug corrections. But like game optimizations, I still believe they were always going to bring that. It's just more of a case of maybe it's going to be on a lower scale, and we're certainly not going to see as many like new features as compared to like their newer generation, just because of the fact that AMD wants to focus more on AI bullshit. And their newer architectures, especially RDNA 4, they do have some pretty notable advantages when it comes to that department. Like even RDNA 3, like even RDNA 3 that has AI accelerators, they don't like some of their technology just don't bode well with the AI accelerators. So like the improvement that they offer in RDNA 4 is no joke. And so even if RDNA 3 is struggling to catch on with things like FSR 4, FSR Redstone, whatever, like even if RDNA 3 is struggling with that, like imagine RDNA 2. Like these cards are never going to keep up with some of the newer things that they've been trying to push with the recent technologies and stuff like that. And so that's at least how I've always viewed it. Like I've always viewed it from that perspective. And again, like, do I think that RDNA 1 and 2 are going to age not as well over time? Yes. I mean, we've kind of been seeing that recently, where a lot of games are like super heavy on ray tracing or not aging the best on these older generation of cards. So it's already kind of happening, and yes, I do think it's gonna get worse over time. And I do think that I think it's fair to blame the inherent architecture of these GPUs. I don't really mind the RDNA 2 architecture. I think that it's a product of its time, definitely. Like in the current rate that games are pushing ray tracing, maybe this graphics card is not going to be super viable in the future. But at the end of the day, like it's just it's not necessarily something that I think that AMD would be super incentivized to try to bring some kind of like arcane magic to suddenly make this keep up with some of the newer, more AI based advancements. So at least that's how I've always viewed it. But again, maybe you might view it from a different perspective. Me personally, to allure back to what I was saying earlier in the video, When I first heard this news, I legitimately did not care. And I didn't care because I don't use AMD's official I don't use AMD's official drivers. I'm on Linux, and so I rely on the AMD GPU graphics driver. I rely on RADV, the Vulkan driver. I rely on the Mesa package for a lot of open source shit, and that kind of stuff. Like those kind of things, they will maintain support for even like really old GPUs. Like I remember there were like GPUs that are like 9 years old that like there were still patches to like optimize for those GPUs. And so I was never really worried about this because like at the end of the day, I know that the community is still going to go hard in making sure to like push the maximum capability, at least to the extent that they can, obviously. Bring further optimizations for even older generations, which right now RDNA2, it's not that old. Like this is still a pretty recent GPU in my, at least from my perspective. And so I never really thought that the community would ever abandon this. And so when I first heard that, I legitimately just wasn't really all that concerned. But obviously, I'm in the minority. Most people are not using Linux. Most people are not installing the Mesa package. And so obviously, I'm completely acknowledging the fact that like this would definitely affect more people than it would people like me. But that's one of the reasons for why I think that you should never rely on the manufacturers essentially having full control over deciding whether or not they want to continue supporting a piece of software or not, which is why open source software is always going to be superior to proprietary software. And that's all I wanted to share. And my food is about to arrive in 1 minute, so I'm just going to stop recording. But essentially, move to Linux.